If you follow the money, you can make money. And I think AEW may have struck gold with this particular debut. And trust me, I actually think this has some serious long-term potential. I don't know if AEW had this in the plans since day one, but let's just talk about it. KAMILLE finally made her debut at AEW Dynamite. She beat up Britt Baker and then stood tall with Mercedes by her side. She is the enforcer for Mercedes Moné. Now, a couple things you need to know. Commentary did not, they didn't have any video packages to go off of. They presented this as, hey, this was somebody who's been on AEW television before. She's a big deal free agent, and it looks like she signed with the company. The reason why that's important is because it is true that AEW didn't air any video packages. And honestly, this is one of those times where it is completely fine, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But it is true. She is in the company. We've known for months and months and months that she's been signed to the company, and we were all scratching our head as to why she didn't appear on TV. What were the plans? Did they always have this planned? We don't know. But it's obviously something that we need to discuss because now she's here, and just by being associated with Mercedes, I have a very strong feeling that long-term this is going to be a very, very, very good debut that we look back at. Couple of reasons why. One, she attacked Britt Baker. So this isn't just some random girl on the women's roster. No, she went after the top brass, one of the faces of the division, one of the faces of the company, somebody who's been there since like day one, right? So KAMILLE clearly made her presence known by going after the big wig. But secondly, that association with Mercedes is such a big deal for people who don't know who KAMILLE is. Now, commentary did acknowledge that she was a free agent, which is great, but they didn't air video packages. So for those who are genuine in the fact that they say, hey, we don't know who she is, this is exactly why it works. Commentary acknowledged who she was. We don't know her backstory, and we don't necessarily know why she's working for Mercedes. That's a story to be told in itself. They can also do video packages at a later time. But the reality is, KAMILLE, by being associated with Mercedes, automatically feels like a big deal. And then, of course, long term, that association will definitely have to die. So if you're associated with Mercedes, and, I look back at the Wardlow situation, Wardlow with MJF. Eventually, Wardlow had so much momentum that when he finally turned on MJF, it was impactful. You can replicate that here with KAMILLE and Mercedes and then turn that into a feud at some point for the women's championship. And that is something that we need to discuss because long term, that's a massive feud for KAMILLE. And I think if they play this right and they do get to that point where she does eventually turn on her, you have automatically created a new star. Now, you got to remember that KAMILLE was a historic champion in the NWA, but nonetheless, the NWA is a smaller company. Not everybody watches it. Not everybody is familiar with them. And so therefore, it is pretty obvious. Yeah, if you heard the reaction, some people knew who she was and some people didn't, but that's okay because by being associated in the storyline with Britt and Mercedes, two of the top names in the company, it does obviously bleed over and help her when it comes to getting noticed by the fans. It also just so happens that KAMILLE is a really talented wrestler. Like, she is a powerhouse. Like, she can do great things in the ring. She's got a special aura. And I think that in itself will automatically gain the respect of fans. But let's go back to what I was saying a little bit earlier about Wardlow. Wardlow was relatively unknown, but by being associated with MJF, which is somebody that everybody liked, it eventually led to him turning. And then it turned into, obviously, some big things. And then eventually AEW kind of dropped the ball, and we know that. And that's one thing I want AEW to correct here. Don't make the same mistake that you made with Wardlow and MJF, because if you do eventually have KAMILLE turn on Mercedes and you don't have any big follow through for her after the fact, it makes all of this meaningless. But I genuinely thought this debut was good because, yeah, they didn't have to do a video package. And for those, I know people are going to say, Ango, you always talk about video packages. You always talk about the idea of video packages and giving like a background to a character. 1000%. But when you have such an impactful debut like this, it was unexpected. And sometimes those unexpected debuts are the ones that make the most sense, especially if KAMILLE had already debuted prior to this. she would have just been doing nothing. She would have been having mid-card feuds and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying right now that KAMILLE is a game changer, but what I am saying is in the long term, it very well could turn out to be that way. And I really enjoyed the debut because I feel like just by that association and just by the way that they did it, it was like the perfect statement being made as to why you should pay attention to her career. A really good comparison is also Mariah May. She's another great example of somebody who debuted kind of like the sidekick. And now she's at the point where a lot of people want to see her beat Toni Storm. And it looks like that could very well be possible. Again, you got to look at what happens after the fact. But I have a very strong feeling we're all going to look at this and be like, they did a good job. I also like the fact that Britt Baker is in this role because Britt Baker is somebody who, you know, at some point when she gets to Mercedes, she might have to go through KAMILLE. That's perfect. Like, you're giving KAMILLE an opportunity to work with the top stars. And that, again, should signal to people that it's a big deal. Britt Baker is somebody who I personally enjoy watching as a heel. But maybe for right now, being a babyface wouldn't be a bad idea. And that's why I think this could be really cool, because as a babyface, I think Britt Baker will do a good job of getting KAMILLE over. I think people genuinely like Britt Baker, and I think people like her as a heel, but I think in general, people like her. So as a babyface, it will work out at the end. But I do want to throw this out there. I do really want to just kind of throw out my thoughts on this, because when I look at a debut like this and I see exactly what they've done here, and I see people making the comparison to Shawn Michaels and Kevin Nash, I actually think it fits. I think it works. I think it's a fair comparison. I also think it's fun that Mercedes could be building something with somebody else. You know, it would be a real shame to have such a big name on your roster and then not having other people associated with it. I always look at Wheeler Yuta being associated with Claudio and John Moxley and Bryan Danielson. Like, I always looked at that as a good thing for Wheeler Yuta. I always like the idea of lesser known people being associated with the bigger names in hopes of giving them a rub. And I think this is one of those times where it just makes so much sense. I want to see AEW do well with this storyline. I really do have a lot of confidence in it, which is nice. But on the flip side of that, you got to do a video package at some point with her. Just, you know, whether it's a video package or an interview or something like that, do some content, whether it's on Rampage or Collision. You know, let people get to know who she is. Remind people about her historic title reign with the NWA. Remind people that she is not just some random person, because at the end of the day, the more important that you make them feel, the more investment they might have towards that individual in the long term. If you tell everybody to follow the money, they will.